We are here with the definitive Star Wars franchise film ranking.
Wait, I thought I was supposed to do Star Trek.
If that's what you want it to be, then that's what it's going to be. So we have all 11 films, including the anthology films. So we're going worst to best, and this is unbiased. So this is just our opinions on what we think is the best film. As if this was our personal lists, this would be much different, which I'll tell you how different at the end. So we each have our own list. For the most part, we don't know each other's, so we're just going to compare. I have the Blu-rays as visuals, and you have absolutely nothing, because you're worthless.
I'll leave.
Okay, yeah, get the fuck out of here. So, number 11. You can go first. What do you got?
I have the newest film of the franchise, The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, this is going to be controversial. I mean, mine's not as controversial. It's more just you have two types of fans. And you have the people that defend Disney and the ones that don't like Disney. And we very much fit the ones that don't like the Disney films. With an exception of one, which we will get to. My number 11, I'm going to put Attack of the Clones. I feel like, from a filmmaking standpoint, I'd put this one dead last. Like I said, this is unbiased. You know, I don't hate this film. There's only 2 films on this list that I legitimately don't like. So, you know, I don't know. I think a lot of the visuals are lacking. I think it has a lot of just... I mean, the whole prequel trilogy, it's known to be bad, which I don't think they're bad films. But this is just kind of the middle part that had a lot to do and really didn't know how to do it. Personally speaking, I would have made this episode 1, and then episode 3 is split into 2 parts. But we'll get into that more when we get to episode 3. But, you know, Attack of the Clones, I feel like it just suffers by being the worst of the Star Wars films. Your number 10?
Number 10 is...
Unless you want to talk about why we think Rise of Skywalker is...
I will get to that when we get to where it's at on your list. I want to debate that with you.
We'll be seeing it soon.
Number 10 for me would be The Last Jedi. And I want to talk about The Last Jedi and why I think it's bad. I will say this. This is the one thing I'm going to say, the one positive thing I'm going to say about The Last Jedi, which is compared to The Rise of Skywalker, which is Rian Johnson is not a bad filmmaker. Knives Out is a good film. Rian Johnson is not a Star Wars filmmaker. Rian Johnson should never have been put in that situation. He's not a writer that can just write on the fly. He's actually admitted that in interviews in the past. But here's the thing I'll say about this compared to the other Disney Star Wars films. At least Rian Johnson had the balls to take chances. It fell flat, in my opinion. I don't think it feels like Star Wars. I think it's a big clusterfuck of a film. But at least he had the balls to actually make an attempt to try to do something new.
My number 10 will be episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. I almost put this dead last. I wanted to. But, like I said, this is unbiased. You know, for me, my biggest problem with this film is the pacing. This has the worst pacing of any Star Wars film. You had to basically play pickup sticks with what Rian Johnson had left, because he left them with nothing for Last Jedi. Last Jedi felt like a conclusion to what Force Awakens had set up, and that's not what a second chapter should do.
No.
You killed Snoke, you killed Luke, and you basically left only like 12 or so Resistance members. And I like the underdog story, but that's just not... You don't go that underdog.
Well, here's a whole other thing with them. I mean, you basically closed Finn and Poe's arcs. I mean, Finn and Poe... Yeah, I was going to fix that, but,
It's all good.
Finn and Poe don't really have story arcs in Rise of Skywalker. I mean, that's your trilogy. That's your big trio right there. 2 parts of your big trio don't have parts. And I think that was partially set up and intentionally done. I feel like that was at least intentionally done because, the big part of this is to make Rey look stronger. And if you don't have Finn and Poe, who are the other, main characters and stuff, and the main leads and stuff, you basically put more of that on Rey, which I think is a big issue, in my opinion. But that's a big problem with The Last Jedi, is it basically kind of clears out everybody's arcs, and the only person who really hasn't really go is Rey, and then Kylo Ren / Ben Solo, which that's a whole other fucking thing.
For me, Episode 9 is a worse film than Last Jedi, but I may like it a little more. But it is, I think, a worse film. It's just, like I said, it had too much to pick up, and bringing Palpatine back was never the plan.
Well, you can clearly tell that was never the plan. I mean,
No.
If you just watch the film, I mean, if you watch how they interact with each other, it's clearly not the plan.
No.
But that's what they did, because that's what they had. That's what they felt they had to do.
Yep.
Which, I mean, here's the thing. With that situation, you basically could do one of two things. You can either A, play the card you're dealt, and you can just play the hand you're dealt and basically try to write around that, and basically, focus on, Kylo Ren basically becoming the big bad and going down that path, or you basically burn everything down and you start anew. And they kind of half-assed it, in which they burned everything down. But pretty much, I would say, and this isn't really a spoiler because I mean it's basically been confirmed by the trailers, is that they basically undo everything The Last Jedi did, and that's what they spend basically the first part of I'd say the first third of the film really focusing on before they really start to take off, which I think really affects the pacing of that, which is just another whole other issue.
And I am going to get into spoilers here, so if you haven't seen it, here's your warning. I think Leia was dealt very good.
Yeah, I agree with that.
For what you have, I mean, I almost thought she was going to be killed off screen at one point.
Yeah.
And her death, I felt, might have been a little half-assed, but that could just be difficulty finding footage for her. But, there was just so many things in Episode 9, which, we're going to do an in-depth review, but I don't know. I just feel like it's just one giant clusterfuck. And there's points where you almost get lost in the pacing, like I said. Like, there's just random cuts. I remember I looked over you during the movie at one point when she was training on near their base, and it just had a horrible jump cut to Kylo Ren. I'm just like, what the hell was that?
Well, that's kind of like how that's one of those things with basically the first 40 minutes of the film. It's just, the pacing's off because it's like 1 minute you're here, and then the next minute you're over here, and the next minute you're there. And it's like, you go to like 10 different places in the first like third of the film, and every time you go to a new place, it's like somebody magically appears and it's like, I'm the person you're looking for, this is where we need to go to the next part, and it's like, awesome. And then it jumps, it's like, okay.
And there's a lot of just convenience because you have a few
yeah.
MacGuffins of the film, and it just feels so convenient, like A to B, A to B, A to B, and there's no consequences in between there, and they're not working for it in between there. But what's your, I believe it's my turn, right? Or is it your turn?
That's my trick. That was your, Rise of Skywalker number 10.
Go ahead.
I'm at what, 9 then?
9.
9, I have Attack of the Clones. This, how I put this in perspective. I like every other movie, including Attack of the Clones, up. Attack of the Clones is a horrible film. It is the film that brought us, I don't like sand, so coarse and rough.
Unlike you, you're so soft, and I just want to touch you.
Anakin, you're scaring me again. You're getting a little rapey.
Yeah, and I feel like Hayden Christensen in Episode 2 is a completely different character in Episode 2 than he is 3. And, I think Episode 3 really improved upon Anakin.
Well, I think the Clone Wars as a whole, I mean, the whole prequel trilogy has its flaws. They're all flawed films. I would say, well, even Revenge of the Sith is a flawed film. I think it's actually a much better film than people give it credit for.
Yep.
But the thing with the prequel trilogy is that you have the Clone Wars TV series, which really fixes a lot of the problems and the plot holes in it. And while, there are certain things it can't fix, certain things you can't overlook, and you shouldn't necessarily have to go to another medium for it to fix, but with for it to fix it, but with Star Wars being a shared universe, meaning it crosses mediums, crosses platforms, you do have to look at that, and I do think that is definitely something to take with a grain of salt, at least. Attack of the Clones, though, I think there are certain positives to it. Obi-Wan's arc, the Kamino arc, I think is actually really interesting.
Yeah, that doesn't get resolved. Unless you watch another TV series, or read this comic book, or read this book over here. I'm under the belief that if you have a film series, resolve your problems in the films. I don't like when it's unorganized to the point where you have to go over here and read it. It's like having a steak, but you have to go somewhere else to put the seasoning on. Just give us the full package. I think it's a nice option for people who want to read books or comics to have more substance, but it shouldn't answer questions. That's just the way I see it. I'm more old school in that aspect, I guess.
I do want to say this about episode 2 as well. I think Jango Fett's an incredibly interesting character. I think that his death in episode 2 was done way too quickly.
Wow.
And this really was just an underutilized character.
Wow, look at Boba's death. Would you rather have Jango Fett's or Boba's death?
Boba Fett had a horrible time. Nobody wants to be stuck in the Sarlacc pit. It's a bad time.
For 1,000 years.
It's a bad time for everyone involved.
Okay, well, my number 9, Last Jedi. This is the film I hate the most out of any Star Wars film. But it's not the worst. We already got into the problems a good bit. But I think, Force Awakens set up a lot. I'm not the biggest fan of Force Awakens, but you can't take away from the fact that Force Awakens at least set up what could have been a cohesive trilogy. And a second and third film can always make the first film better. It's setting up, it's exposition, so that's fine. It may be rehashed to some people, and in a way it is a bit of a rehash, yes. Bob Iger's fully admitted that. But at the same time, it did set up interesting plots, what could have been interesting characters, and Last Jedi just flushed that down the toilet. You have the horrible Canto Bight sequence. There's nothing I hate more in film than forced politics. And this film just has so much just unnecessary forced politics.
I mean, politics in film isn't a bad thing, as long as it makes sense with the story.
Yeah.
The problem with the Canto Bight's storyline is that it's basically an extra, 36 minutes or something like that?
I wouldn't go quite that long, but it's up there.
It's around 30 minutes, let's just stick with that, which is basically just a 30-minute segment which is completely unneeded. Does nothing for the story, you can completely override it. I mean, it's ridiculous. It just adds in, it's basically just put an agenda in there, and that's never what you do with film. I mean, if you want to put an agenda in the film, make sure that it fits with the story, fits into the plot. And the fact that they didn't do that is just such a clusterfuck, and it's really honestly, it's disrespectful to fans.
What's your next one?
What am I at, 8?
Yep.
Let me pull my list out.
You should have been prepared.
I was prepared. You told me not to look at my phone, you dick. Solo, a Star Wars story.
That's actually my number 8 as well.
I actually don't think Solo is that bad, to be honest. I think Solo, the problem with Solo is it just didn't take any risks. It's very safe. It's very, bland. It's not a bad film. It just wasn't a needed film. I don't necessarily love the droid character and stuff they had. I can't think of
my God.
her name. Oh, God.
Talk about...
Your eyes?
Yeah, talk about forced politics.
I mean, I don't have a problem with... I thought... I would say Danny Glover. Danny Glover and Donald Glover, very different people. Donald Glover's performance as young Lando was pretty good. I actually really liked him.
Yeah.
But he's a great actor as it is. I mean, that's besides the point.
And, I mean, the actor who played Han Solo, I was very skeptical about him, but when you watch the film, it actually really fits a pre-Episode 4 Han Solo. I liked how it got into the relationship with Chewie a good bit. It didn't just breeze by that. You had substance here. It's just a film that nobody asked for, but I'm not mad that we got it. I can sit through it. I've seen it twice now. It's just not one that I'm going to jump and go watch again.
Well, the thing with that does, I don't want to say this, is that I think that, you know, the actor who played Han did a really good job, especially when you hear the horror stories, because there was like all these reports coming up that like he couldn't remember his lines, and that they had all these issues, and that he couldn't get, you know, Han's voice down. And I honestly, I thought for the most part he did a relatively good job. The thing that I thought was good though about the film that makes me a little disappointed, but we're not going to get a sequel now. We're not going to basically continue with the storyline. Is I really liked Emilia Clarke's character. I thought her character was really interesting. Honestly, I thought she was the most interesting character in the entire film, and for us not to get, you know, basically a fault to her storyline now, I feel is kind of it's kind of robbing the fans. But I understand why we're not going to, because we were upset because of The Last Jedi. So a lot of people didn't go out to see Solo.
I didn't go see it. It took me 6 months to actually watch it. And you have to also look at the directors who were fired, and they brought in Ron Howard. So it's hard to you have so many different directors' visions kind of clashing here. But overall, for as many problems we were having for the production of this, there were reports that there were acting coaches on set. Honestly, it didn't turn out that bad.
No, that's what I found. It turned out pretty good for the most part.
What's your next one?
So number 7, if I'm correct, it is, Phantom Menace.
Same.
I'm going to be completely honest. Phantom Menace is probably my biggest guilty pleasure. I fucking love this movie. It's the first Star Wars movie I ever saw. I saw it in theaters. And this is a weird little tidbit for us, is that we didn't meet each other until elementary school. We both remember going to see Phantom Menace at a weird movie theater. And it was a double feature with Tarzan.
Yep.
And knowing us, we probably saw each other like, look at that fat little fucker.
Yeah, you know, Phantom Menace is a guilty pleasure. It's not a good film, but I think if you watch it enough, there are good qualities. I can sit through it and perfectly enjoy it. There are obviously issues. You know, I'm not a Jar Jar fan. I think
I want to be in the movie.
Yeah, basically. But here's the thing. I don't want Jar Jar completely out of the film. Just take him out a little bit. You know, don't make him such a big aspect of the film. But there's also the theory that he was the antagonist of the trilogy. And George Lucas basically canceled that whole plot line. And that was actually hinted at by Ahmed Best, who's the actor who played Jar Jar Binks. He actually came out and said that he's glad someone recognized the theory. And that, you know, got heads rolling.
Well, I mean, if you look at the movie, Jar Jar, there are several scenes in which Jar Jar appears to use the Force.
You have Drunken Fist.
I mean, there's a scene where he basically jumps like 20 feet. And, like, I know Gungans can jump high, but it jumps higher than a Gungan can jump.
How do you know how high a Gungan jumps?
I watched the Clone Wars series, you son of a bitch.
Oh, sorry, I didn't watch Clone Wars. I watched a little
They
bit.
beat Grievous. They're a great warrior species.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good fight. I recommend it.
Okay.
It makes sense. They have EMP weapons. He's a droid. He's a cyborg or an android. But besides the point. Besides the point. But no, I actually like Phantom Menace. I think that there are definitely really good aspects to it. I think Darth Maul is, you know, a phenomenal character. Also gives us the greatest Star Wars song of all time, Duel of the Fates.
I mean...
Which we didn't get in Rise of Skywalker, even though it was fucking teased.
Well... But they gave everything else. Yeah, Phantom Menace, here's the problem. You know, it was such a disappointment to so many people because after 1983, people knew the prequels were coming. So they waited 16 years and they all had their own vision in their head.
Oh, yeah.
It's always going to disappoint somebody. And, you know, look at us right now. We had a vision for the sequel trilogy, and we were disappointed by it. And it's kind of the same boat that people were in back then.
George promised us a very different fate. We were promised a different fate, and George was screwed over.
But yeah. I mean, Phantom Menace, I think, has some really good aspects to it, but it is a flawed film. What do you have next?
I have Force Awakens next.
So do I.
I'm glad we were
Yep.
such great minds think alike. No, I think Force Awakens is, of the new Disney trilogy, I think it's actually, I've said this before. I think Force Awakens is a very well-made film. The problem with Force Awakens is that it's a horrible Star Wars film. And the reason it's a horrible Star Wars film is because it adds nothing new to the story. I mean, it's basically an entire, if you look at the plot, plot point for plot point, it's basically an entire rehash of A New Hope. And I understand the reason why they did that was because, there was a lot of backlash for the prequels. Disney was going to bring something, a little bit more safe, going forward with this new trilogy. And I think that's a big problem with this new Disney trilogy. They never really had a whole plan or, idea of where we wanted to go, because Force Awakens is completely safe, whereas, Last Jedi is the complete opposite. It's all risk. And for me, neither really hits well, but I can at least respect Force Awakens as a good film.
I remember seeing it, in 2015 in theaters. And I came out not necessarily disappointed, just not really knowing how to feel. And I did have the mindset where it's only one of three. Let's wait till episode 8. You're going to have Luke in there. So I gave it a chance. I was kind of more optimistic than I normally would be. And, looking back, I think this is the only one of the sequel trilogy that I can actually sit down and watch.
Well, I think that's frustrating for me is looking back at it. Each film gets worse, and then considerably worse. Force Awakens, I agree. Force Awakens is the only film I could probably watch and at least get some enjoyment out of it. Although I know where it's going, so that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem for me. But it's disappointing for me because each film got increasingly worse.
And J.J. Abrams is a good director. He's a good filmmaker. He's a very studio filmmaker, but I think he did a good job. He probably had a lot of people breathing down his neck telling him what to do, and I think he made something, the best he could given the situation. So, I think it's a confident film. I may not like too many of the characters. I had some issues with just, it's just it's not going to fit your vision. That's how I feel. And I'm not saying it's Disney's fault for not seeing my vision. It's more just, is this the story they should have went with that made the most sense?
Well, I think, there were interesting plot points to it. I mean, you have the character of Finn, who is a stormtrooper who, defected. And I think that was a really interesting, storyline. And it didn't go anywhere. You have the character of Poe, who is this, he's a rebel fighter pilot, a resistance fighter pilot and stuff, but he's kind of, he's very headstrong. He's very, he thinks it's act first, think second. It didn't really go anywhere. I mean, you have this character of Rey who, is this, scavenger of a sort, and stuff, she's been abandoned, but she's always felt something different. She's always wanted to make a difference. And Rey's really the only character who goes anywhere, but her character never really has any development. It's just suddenly goes from, you interesting character, scavenger character to the most powerful character in Star Wars without any training. And I think we'll get into that later on and stuff with our actual review of, Rise of Skywalker and stuff like that, because they did try to basically shoehorn some stuff and training in there, but by that point it's too late.
Yeah, it's too late.
The damage has been done. You can't really fix it at this point. Which is, here's another thing I want to talk about with this trilogy. Just quick side note: the time. I feel like it's the shortest gap of any period, because the prequels. I mean, it's over the course of. I mean, Anakin's a young child.
I think it's 13 years.
13 years and stuff, and then what's the original trilogy? You know this.
Let's see. It's around 4 to 5, somewhere around there.
Which this has been. I mean, Last Jedi takes place immediately after Force Awakens, and then this takes place about a year after Last Jedi. So I mean, it's the shortest period of time we're not seeing growth. I mean, you see growth with Anakin. You see growth with Luke. Rey, you don't really see growth. I mean, it just suddenly you have storyline, and then suddenly it changes, and that's how it is, and that we're just told that's how it is, and that's a big problem for me with Force Awakens, because I feel like it could have given us more, but at the same time, it's the first movie in a trilogy, and that's that.
Okay, so what do you have up next?
So 5, I think you're going to disagree with me. I have Return of the Jedi next.
Okay, this was difficult. I didn't know whether to put Rogue One or Return of the Jedi next. From a filmmaking standpoint, it's tough because, this is an unbiased list, like I said. I think I will put Return of the Jedi next as well. So, there you have it. I love this film to death, but it's one of those things where you do have to look at Return of the Jedi. I think it does have more flaws.
Yeah, I think Jedi is definitely a good film. I think it's definitely... Because now we've crossed into, with Force Awakens, we've crossed into the Star Wars films that are at least critically good. Doesn't mean you don't love them, doesn't mean you can't enjoy them, just means these are the films that are actually critically... They're good, they're positive. Mm-hmm. Jedi, I think, is definitely a good film. It's definitely a good conclusion to a trilogy. There are definitely flaws there. I mean, I think certain things are rushed, and certain characters, relationships change during the film for how they were in the series. But for the most part, it's really entertaining. I think, you see Vader's redemption. I mean, because overall, the whole story is, at least the way I view Star Wars, the whole main trilogies, trilogies, I just say storyline, it's all about Anakin Skywalker. Would you agree with that statement?
You could see.
Because I view Star Wars as Anakin's redemption story. That's how I view Star Wars. And that may be completely wrong, but that's how I interpret it.
I like to think more an overarching theme is just family as a whole.
That's fair.
You see family in every film. It may be subtle. Episode 1 has a lot about family. The relationship between Anakin and his mother.
Yeah.
And you have a brotherly bond with Obi-Wan and Anakin in the prequels. And then you have father and son. So I think it's more about the Skywalker family.
I mean, that's fair.
Because you have Leia, you have, I would say more family. The original 6, you can definitely make a case that Anakin Skywalker is the main character. More on a deeper metaphorical level.
Yeah.
My biggest issue with Return of the Jedi. I love this film to death, but even as a kid, George Lucas was done with Star Wars at the time. He only directed A New Hope. Irvin Kershner did Empire beautifully. Whereas, Return of the Jedi, it felt like George Lucas was just kind of on the sidelines and just didn't care as much. And this is when he started to market Star Wars more as a property than a film series.
Yeah.
You have the Ewoks. You have, just so many elements that are just made to be toys and to sell more merchandise. I guarantee the Ewoks would not have been made if it didn't come with a price tag on the toy.
Now tell me, why would an 8-foot-tall Wookiee want to live on a planet with a bunch of 2-foot-tall Ewoks? Just doesn't make sense.
I don't get that reference.
South Park.
Oh, okay.
Chewbacca defense.
Okay. Is it later South Park?
It's early South Park.
Okay.
You sick bastard.
Alright. I only watch early South Park, so I'm surprised I didn't get that.
How did you not get that?
But yeah, I love the redemption story. I love, the Emperor. I love Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor. And I love how they shrouded the Emperor until Return of the Jedi. Because, back in 1983, you only had that one little snippet in Empire of who the Emperor was. You didn't have the prequels as context. So I love bringing him into the story and really showing how much power he really had over everyone. And kind of bringing more questions about what he had to do with Vader turning to the dark side. So I think it's a beautiful film. I love Return of the Jedi. At one point, it was my favorite Star Wars film. Not anymore. Kind of the older I get, the original 3 kind of rotated. But Next up, I have Rogue One. What do you have next?
I have Rogue One as well.
Okay. So, this is the only Disney Star Wars film I actually really like. Another one that nobody asked for, and I was just kind of like, what's really the context of this? And then after seeing it, it really makes A New Hope better. It really does. Because I think it is a story that kind of begged to be told. Because in A New Hope, I'm not trying to shit on A New Hope here, but it kind of did just kind of shoehorn the plans. They just got the Death Star plans. They didn't really talk about how they got them as much. So I think this actually really adds to A New Hope. And it also, a lot of people complain about the darker tone, and that really angers me. You're at a point where the Empire has taken over the galaxy. It's going to be a dark and depressing film.
That's the thing.
And I give Disney credit for actually doing that. And actually killing pretty much almost every character off at the end. Because that's what had to happen. So this is a film that I severely give Disney credit for.
Well, the thing is, I know Disney was really upset overall as a studio because they wanted to make... I know Cassian and then Jyn Erso, the actors and stuff, were supposed to get a TV series. And they killed them. So they couldn't do it. I know Disney was really upset because that's how they did, but ultimately, I think it worked really well. Now, I've talked to certain people who say the darker tone just doesn't work for them. Again, I agree with you. This is a dark period of Star Wars.
Yeah, it needs to be.
The Empire is in full reign and control. This isn't, happy times. These are, rough times. Bad things are happening. And I really like the darker tone of the film overall. I just think it works well.
Yep.
It also has my favorite scene in any Star Wars film. And honestly, one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema, which is the Darth Vader scene at the end. I love that scene. I think it's phenomenal.
I wouldn't say it's my favorite scene in Star Wars, but it's definitely up there. And, I just love, I think this is the same director that did Godzilla, if I'm correct, the 2014 Godzilla. And he's very good at showing the scale of a scene. Like, for example, you saw the Death Star in full glory. Just great camera angles, great perspectives. You saw the AT-ATs from the characters' perspectives, which you didn't really see as much in Empire. So, I think this movie added a lot to the entire original trilogy. And I think it is a great... If you're going to watch A New Hope, check out Rogue One, because it adds a lot to it. So, what do you have next?
So we're at, 3 then?
Yep.
So I have Revenge of the Sith next.
As do I.
Now, Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie. I love the Clone Wars era. That's my favorite era of Star Wars. It's got its flaws, though. It definitely has its flaws. I think pacing for the film could be a little bit better, to say the least.
Yeah, here's where I get into what I was getting into earlier. I think Revenge of the Sith is 2 films in one. I would have made Episode 1 a teenage Anakin, and because I don't necessarily think you had to have him as a child. Have flashbacks as a child. Give some context to him as a child. I think Episode 1 should have been him and Obi-Wan training, developing their relationship. Because that's one big problem I have with the prequels. You don't see Obi-Wan and Anakin together as much as you should.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're separated in Attack of the Clones, and they're also separated a lot in Revenge of the Sith. But then, you were my brother, Anakin. Well, you don't really get that much context there. So, I would have loved to see a good 40 minutes of just the Jedi Purge. All these Jedi characters you came to know and love just getting slaughtered, but give some context there. So, I think pacing's my biggest issue with Revenge of the Sith. I'm not a big fan of the Darth Vader no at the end. I just cringe every time I hear it. And I actually think I would have included a tiny bit more Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit. Maybe even 30 seconds more. But, you know, I love the soundtrack of this film. It had a lot of great new music added to it.
Oh, yeah.
It really... I thought it was a really good film. You know, and I wouldn't say it's a great film, but I'd say it's really good. It's obviously the best of the prequels.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think there are definite strong points to it. I think, you know, the ending fight is a strong point. I mean, I definitely agree that the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan should have been developed more in the films. Thankfully, again, the Clone Wars series really does help fix things. You do see more of the relationship.
Brotherly bond.
Yeah, you definitely do. I mean, I can think of multiple arcs off the top of my head in which you see that. But I think it also... I do think that scene, the scenes throughout is just a very... I think the fight works really well. And I do think you feel emotion from both characters.
I think you should feel more emotion, but...
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I felt... I think Revenge of the Sith needed more substance. It was doing a lot. It was accomplishing a lot. But I just feel like there's too many aspects in there. Like General Grievous, take him out. He doesn't need to be in there.
Well,
you know, I love Count Dooku in Episode 3. I hated him in Episode 2. But I think, you know, his scene in Episode 3 was very necessary. I love that whole kind of foreshadowing of the Emperor. The look that, you know, Christopher Lee gives Ian McDiarmid. I think it's priceless. But I think Revenge of the Sith was trying to do too much with not enough substance.
I agree to an extent. One thing I do want to talk about just as a flaw for the film for me is I think during the main part of the Jedi Purge that we see, basically Order 66, I think that there are certain deaths that happen that I don't understand how they did not sense it. Plo Koon comes to... You know, that's a big one for me that comes to the forefront. How does he not sense that? I mean, you would, you know what I mean?
You know Clone Wars better than I do. So, I don't know Plo Koon as well. My biggest problem is, like, Kit Fisto and Cessa Tin just getting slaughtered by the Emperor. Or not the Emperor, Palpatine. I think you needed kind of more of a fight there, like the 4-on-1 fight, instead of just taking each of them out and then just Mace Windu and Palpatine.
Well, I think that goes along. I mean, I don't know. We were actually talking about this the other day. There was a scene that was cut, which would have made Grievous. Basically, the Grievous Obi-Wan fight was supposed to have, I think it was like 8 minutes longer or 12 minutes longer. Basically, a big fight scene. They had this whole thing choreographed. And Ewan McGregor actually said that it would have been the best fight in any of the Star Wars movies. But it got cut because they didn't have time. And I think that's one of those things where they wanted to keep that in the film. And I feel like they probably had it. You know, it was probably choreographed better and stuff. I assume they probably had, you know, each of them, you know, getting picked off, you know, after like about another minute or so. Probably to each, you know, one fighting. And it just, you know, slowly he's picking one off at a time instead of, you know, just a quick boom, boom, boom. Now it's just Mace Windu versus, you know, Palpatine, basically. Which I do like that fight, that aspect of the fight, just when it's Windu versus Palpatine. I think that's a good fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, except for the bad stunt coordinator, CGI head of Ian McDiarmid.
I don't even talk about that.
So, next up we have, obviously, number 1 and number 2. Number 2 is my favorite Star Wars film.
Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan.
I'm not a Star Trek fan.
I really like Star Trek.
A lot of people like Star
I
Trek.
I don't like Star Trek, okay?
I've always been a Star Wars guy. One of my all-time favorite films, period, and my favorite Star Wars film, but it's obviously not as good as Empire. We have A New Hope. This film is magic for me. Like, I can watch this once a week and not get tired of it. It's what I consider the film to be responsible for me getting into film in the first place, or at least one of them. And, you know, just really, it just captures me every time I watch it. I'm assuming that's your number 2 as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think New Hope is definitely number 2 for me. This, I don't think was as close as I feel like it should be, but it was a harder decision to make because I feel like A New Hope is one of the most influential films of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Arguably, you can make a case that it's the most influential Star Wars film of all time. But I don't think it's the best Star Wars film, and that's why I had to put it at 2. But honestly, it's a really good film. I mean, the characters are great. The story itself is great.
The
Editing's phenomenal.
the sound design. That's one of those things that people kind of overlook. The sound design in this film, I think, is the best of any film.
The soundtrack's awesome as well.
Soundtrack, John Williams, of course. Yeah, it's just.
And when you look at like the stuff that George Lucas had to deal with to make that film, honestly, it's really just impressive.
Yeah.
And nobody believed in it. That's the thing. Nobody but George Lucas believed in the film.
Well, in a way, it was very much saved last minute in the editing process because they basically scrapped the whole film because they had a whole cut. Nobody liked it. So they had to basically start over, and that's the film we got in 1977. And now we have the special editions, but we're not going to get into that tonight. So, our number one, of course...
The Clone Wars movie.
I was going to say the holiday special.
Oh, God!
But let's go with Empire. Just to be safe here. It's got to be Empire.
Yeah.
It used to be my favorite Star Wars film. Like I said, the older I get, the more it just kind of rotates around. You know, I think Empire is the perfect sequel. It has, I believe it's a 3-year time jump.
Yeah, it is.
But I think it's kind of perfect because you have Luke, he's advanced his force powers just a little bit, just enough to show progression. You have Han and Leia clearly have a development in their relationship. You have just very clear progression of these characters. And, you know, they're maturing, the story's maturing, and it really kind of hits you in the gut watching it for the first time. Because A New Hope, in a way, it's a very safe film. You know, you have the happy ending and everything. When this one, you don't have that happy ending. And that actually jarred a lot of people and critics back in 1980. A lot of people hated this film back then. They didn't know what to think. Whereas now it's one of the greatest films ever made.
I mean, honestly, you could argue it's the greatest sequel ever made.
Yeah.
I don't think I would put it that high, but it's definitely top 5, if not top 3 for me. I mean, it's so good. I mean, and again, it ends on a darker note, which, you know, again, at the time wasn't, you know, perceived well, wasn't taken well, but looking back on it, I mean, it makes the most sense, and you had to do it that way. I don't think you could have done it any other way, personally speaking.
So, yeah, that'll about do it for this ranking video. We pretty much agreed on a lot. You know, the things we didn't agree on, it wasn't very far apart. So give us your rankings down below, and then you can shit on us for not liking the Disney films. So, awesome.